I have no regret at all. I think the fact is that many of the listed companies in Australia today, the CEOs are worried about influencers, and they're worried about the Twitter sphere, and they're less worried about what's happening to their customer base, and much less the views of their employees. I think a company, for example, to look at Wesfarmers, I think their $2 million would be better off reducing prices in their supermarkets or reducing prices at Bunnings. When I go to Bunnings, I want to pay less for my goods, not more. And I don't want to, every time I hand over my credit card or cash at Bunnings or at Coles, I don't want part of that money going to an activist CEO. These CEOs who are closer to the union bosses than they are the workers, I think they've got a lot to answer for, and they're happier, it seems, in the company of the super fund CEOs and all of those people who are on millions of dollars a year. They've lost touch with their workers, and so is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is happier in that company with the union bosses and the super bosses and the CEOs of big businesses than in the company of workers. And the fact is that today the Liberal Party represents the values of workers and of tradies, and I don't apologise for that whatsoever.
What do you think is the number one issue facing Indigenous Australians then?
I think Indigenous Australians, like all Australians, are facing cost of living pressures. They're paying a lot more for their electricity under this government. They're paying a lot more for their gas. They're paying more for their fuel. They're certainly getting less for their grocery bill when they go to the supermarket. And in Indigenous communities, particularly in remote and regional areas, those Indigenous families are doing it very tough. I mean, in Alice Springs or Ceduna or Tennant Creek or Kimberley's, Leonora, Laverton, these are areas where billions of dollars of money poured into the funnel from Canberra becomes a trickle into these communities, and people are living in squalor without the proper services that we would expect. But the Voice is not going to solve that problem. The Voice is a Canberra voice. It's a grouping of 24 elites who aren't going to represent the views of Indigenous women and elders in Indigenous communities. I want to listen to those voices, and that's why I visited there. And frankly, I think the Prime Minister, instead of flying his jet across these communities on his way to another international fora, he'd be better off to stop the plane, roll his sleeves up and get out and talk to real people. The Prime Minister today shouting from Kirribilli there that Australians have nothing to worry about, that their mortgages are okay, it's a nonsense. He's out of touch with the average Australian at the moment. We've been to Food Bank and to Salvation Army and to small businesses around the country at the moment. We know at Food Bank they've got a 57% increase in the number of people presenting to just feed their families. That's unprecedented. We know, as I said before, that 40% of Australian mortgage holders struggled to pay their mortgage in May. And that's happened under 14 months of Labor's watch. The official cash rate has gone from 0.35 of 1% up to 4.1%, and families are struggling to pay their bills under Labor. And that's very reminiscent of what we saw when Labor was in power in the early 90s, and I don't want a repeat of that for our country.